The late summer sun hung low over Camp Willow Ridge, a modest military training ground nestled in the rolling hills of Northern Virginia. It was the kind of place where the air smelled of pine and gunpowder, and the echo of rifle shots rolled like distant thunder across the valley. On this particular Saturday, in August 2025, the base was alive with activity. A group of fresh-faced National Guard recruits had gathered for their annual sharpshooting competition, a tradition that drew a small crowd of local veterans, families, and curious townsfolk. The range was a sea of green uniforms, gleaming rifles, and the sharp bark of commands. A faded banner strung across the entrance read, "Willow Ridge Sharpshooting Classic 2025, fluttering in the warm breeze." At the edge of the field, a battered Chevy sedan crunched to a stop on the gravel lot. The driver's door creaked open, and out stepped an older man, his movements deliberate but steady. His name was Samuel "Sam" Harper, though most who knew him decades ago called him Hawk, for reasons long buried in military lore. He was 72 now, his face etched with lines that told stories he rarely shared. He wore a faded denim jacket, a pair of scuffed boots, and a baseball cap with a small embroidered eagle on the front. A worn leather satchel hung from his shoulder, its contents a mystery to anyone watching. His right hip bore the faint stiffness of an old injury, a souvenir from a night in Vietnam he never spoke of. Sam's granddaughter, Specialist Clara Harper, spotted him from the lineup of competitors. She broke away from her squad, her boots kicking up dust as she ran over. "Grandpa Sam, you came," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and delight. Sam's weathered face softened with a faint smile. "Told you I'd make it, Clara. Wanted to see you shoot like I taught you." Clara beamed, her cheeks flushing with pride. She'd grown up hearing whispers of her grandfather's past, how he'd been a sniper in the Vietnam War, how he'd trained others after coming home. But he never spoke of it himself. To her, he was just Grandpa Sam, the man who taught her to shoot tin cans off a fence with a steady hand and a quiet laugh. A few recruits nearby glanced over, curious. One of them, a cocky young private named Ethan, smirked. "Who's the old-timer?" he muttered to his buddy, loud enough for Clara to hear. She turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "That's my grandfather, Sam Harper. He was a sniper back in the day." Ethan shrugged, unimpressed. "Looks like he can barely walk, let alone shoot. What's he gonna do, hit the target with his cane?" His friend snickered, but Clara's glare silenced them. She turned back to Sam, her voice softer. "Don't mind them, Grandpa. They don't know you like I do." The head instructor, Lieutenant Marissa Coleman, noticed Sam and approached with a polite nod. She was a no-nonsense officer in her late 30s, her uniform crisp and her demeanor professional. "Welcome, sir. You're free to watch from the bleachers. It might get a bit loud out here." She gestured to a folding chair nearby, its metal frame rusted from years of use. Sam tipped his cap, his voice gravelly but warm. "Appreciate it, Lieutenant. I'll stay out of the way." But as he moved to sit, he paused, his hand brushing the satchel. He opened it carefully, revealing a long object wrapped in a faded green cloth. He unfolded it slowly, revealing an ancient M24 sniper rifle, its wood stock polished smooth from years of use, but scratched with the scars of history. The metal gleamed faintly under the sunlight, a relic from another era. A small carving on the stock, a hawk in flight, caught the light, a mark left by a friend long gone. Coleman raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. "That's quite a piece you've got there, sir. I haven't seen an M24 like that in years. You sure it still fires?" Sam's eyes crinkled at the corners, a hint of mischief in his gaze. "She fires just fine, long as I'm steady." Clara shifted beside him, a mix of pride and nervousness. "He taught me how to shoot with that rifle when I was a kid," she said quietly, her voice tinged with admiration. Coleman chuckled, though her tone carried a hint of skepticism. "Well, We've got an extra lane at the end if you'd like to take a shot or two. Just for kicks." The way she said kicks suggested she didn't expect much, but Sam didn't seem to notice. He nodded. "Might take you up on that." The recruits were busy at their stations, adjusting scopes and loading magazines, their laughter and chatter filling the air. The competition was in full swing, with targets set at 500 meters, a standard distance for the event. Most of the recruits were struggling, their shots scattering across the paper targets like a child's drawing. Sam made his way to lane 12, the farthest from the crowd, where an old wooden bench sat under a sagging canopy. His steps were slow, his right hip stiff from that long-ago injury, a shard of shrapnel from a jungle ambush in 1972, a wound that had nearly ended his career, but never his spirit. A few of the younger soldiers watched, some with pity, others with mild amusement. "Bet he can't even see the target," one whispered. Another snickered. "Hope he doesn't shoot the wrong lane." Sam ignored them. He set the M24 on the bench, his hands moving with a quiet precision that belied his age. He adjusted his cap, then picked up the rifle, feeling its weight like an old friend. The target was set at 800 meters, a challenging distance even for the best marksman here, far beyond what the recruits were attempting. He'd asked for the longer range when he signed in, a request that had raised a few eyebrows, but was granted with a shrug. Sam took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly. He raised the rifle, his posture slightly hunched but steady, his fingers, gnarled with age, wrapped around the grip. He closed one eye, the other peering through the old iron sights. No modern optics for him. The crowd faded into the background, their voices a distant hum. The first shot rang out. Bang! The bullet sailed wide, kicking up a puff of dirt well short of the target. A few recruits chuckled. Ethan called out, "Nice try, Pops. Maybe stick to the spectator seats." His voice dripped with mockery, and a few others joined in with stifled laughter. Coleman crossed her arms, her expression a mix of sympathy and amusement. "Let's not overdo it, sir," she said gently, her tone suggesting she was ready to move on. "We've got plenty of rounds for the kids," but Sam's voice cut through, calm and firm. "One more." His words were quiet, but there was a weight to them, a steel that made Coleman pause. She glanced at Clara, who nodded eagerly, her eyes shining with belief. "He's got this, Lieutenant." Coleman sighed, her skepticism clear, but her curiosity piqued. "All right, one more shot." The crowd went back to their own targets, dismissing Sam as a novelty, a sweet old man reliving his glory days. But Clara watched her grandfather closely, her heart pounding. She'd seen that look in his eyes before, back when he'd taught her to shoot cans off a fence at their family farm in rural Virginia. It was the look of a man who hadn't forgotten, a man who carried the weight of 1,000 unseen battles. Sam took his time. He ran his thumb along the rifle stock, tracing the small carving, a hawk in flight, etched there by a fellow soldier in 1971, a man named Tommy, who hadn't made it out of the jungle. The memory came unbidden. A moonless night in the Mekong Delta, the crack of enemy fire, the weight of Tommy's body as Sam dragged him through the mud to safety. He shook the thought away, exhaling slowly. The world around him faded, the chatter, the wind, the distant hum of a generator. All of it disappeared. It was just him, the rifle, and the target. His hands steadied, his breathing slowed to a rhythm honed by decades of discipline. He pulled the trigger. Bang! This time, the range fell silent. Not the casual silence of boredom, but the heavy, reverent silence of awe. The shot echoed across the valley, a sound so clean it seemed to linger in the air. Coleman froze, her clipboard slipping slightly in her hand. Ethan, mid-laugh, stopped cold, his mouth hanging open. A recruit at the spotting scope muttered, "No way." Coleman grabbed her binoculars, her movements quick and urgent. She zoomed in on the target at 800 meters, her breath catching in her throat. The bullseye, a tiny black dot at that distance, was gone. A perfect hole sat dead center, the paper around it torn in a symmetrical starburst. It wasn't just a hit. It was a shot so precise, it looked like a machine had done it. The recruits began to murmur, their voices a mix of disbelief and excitement. Did he just... at 800 meters? With that old rifle? No scope, man. No scope. Clara's eyes welled up with pride, but Sam didn't react. He lowered the M24, his face as calm as if he'd just tied his shoelaces. He turned to Clara and said softly, "That's for you, kid." Then he sat down on the bench, resting the rifle across his knees, his hands folded as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Ethan, still holding his own rifle, walked over to the spotting scope to see for himself. He pulled back, his face pale. "That's impossible," he whispered. "He didn't even use a scope." Another recruit muttered, "Who is this guy?" Coleman, now visibly shaken, turned to Sam, her voice unsteady. "Sir, what did you say your name was?" Sam adjusted his cap, his tone matter-of-fact. "Sam Harper. Used to shoot a bit back in the day." The name didn't mean much to the younger recruits, but one of the older spectators, a retired sergeant named Tom Bradley, who'd come to watch his nephew, suddenly straightened. Bradley was in his late 60s, his hair graying but his memory sharp. He'd served at Camp Pendleton in the 1990s, and the name Sam Harper rang a bell buried deep in his mind. "Harper? Sam Harper? From Camp Pendleton?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Coleman nodded slowly. "He mentioned Pendleton earlier." "Why?" Bradley didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed. Within moments, he found what he was looking for, an archived military record from 1995. "Camp Pendleton sniper record, 1995, he read aloud, his voice growing louder with each word. "Longest confirmed bullseye at 800 meters. Open range, no optics. Samuel Harper. Record stood for 30 years. Until today." The crowd grew quiet again, the weight of the moment sinking in. Clara looked at her grandfather, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa, you never told me." Sam shrugged, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip below the hills. Didn't think it mattered anymore. But it did matter. To everyone on that range. A young private ran to the main office, pulling up old records on a dusty computer that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. The screen flickered, then displayed a grainy photo of a younger Sam Harper, standing beside a target identical to the one he'd just shot. The record had been set on August 15th, 1995, exactly 30 years ago to the day. Word spread like wildfire through Camp Willow Ridge. Within minutes, a jeep pulled up to the range, its tires crunching on the gravel. Out stepped Major General Robert Klein, the commanding officer of the base. He was a tall man in his 50s, his face stern, but his eyes warm with a quiet respect. He walked straight to Sam, who was still seated, sipping coffee from a thermos Clara had brought him. The general removed his cap, a gesture of respect rarely seen from someone of his rank. "Mr. Harper," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "We've had your name on a plaque in the training hall for 3 decades. I read it every year during our memorial ceremony. I never thought I'd meet the man behind it." Sam looked up, his expression unchanged. "Didn't come here to break records, General. Just wanted to see my granddaughter shoot." Klein smiled faintly, a rare crack in his usually stoic demeanor. "I understand. But that shot today, it wasn't just a record. It was a reminder. Some skills never fade, and some stories deserve to be told." The recruits, who had been whispering among themselves, now stood in a loose semicircle around Sam, their faces a mix of awe and respect. Ethan, the cocky private who'd mocked Sam earlier, stepped forward, his voice low and sincere. "Sir, I'm sorry for what I said earlier. That was incredible." Sam waved a hand dismissively, his tone gentle. "You'll learn, son. We all do." Clara sat beside her grandfather, her hands trembling as she opened his satchel. Inside, beneath a cleaning cloth and a pair of old gloves, was a small notebook, its leather cover cracked with age. She flipped it open, revealing yellowed pages filled with sketches of targets, handwritten notes on wind speed, and a faded photograph. The photo showed a young Sam in Vietnam, kneeling beside two soldiers, one holding a sniper rifle, the other lying on a stretcher, smiling weakly despite the blood on his uniform. A note on the back, written in a shaky hand, read, "Hawk saved us, 1972. Clara's voice cracked as she spoke, her fingers brushing the photo. "You saved them, and you never said anything." Sam took the notebook from her, his fingers tracing the photo with a tenderness that belied his gruff exterior. "They didn't all make it," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got them out of an ambush in the Mekong Delta, 1972. We were pinned down for hours, enemy fire from every direction. I carried Tommy 3 miles through the jungle, but he didn't make it to the chopper. Jimmy, the one on the stretcher, survived long enough to get home, but he passed a year later. I stopped shooting for a while after that. Felt like every shot carried their weight." Clara wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "Why'd you start again today?" Sam looked at her, his gaze steady and piercing. "Because you asked me to come, Clara. And I wanted you to see what I couldn't tell you. I wanted you to know that the quiet ones, the ones who don't boast, they're the ones who carry the world on their shoulders." Clara nodded, her tears falling freely now. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The recruits around them stood in silence, some with their heads bowed, others wiping their own eyes. Even Ethan, who'd been so quick to mock, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight with emotion. The next day, the range was quieter, but the story of Sam Harper's shot had spread far beyond Camp Willow Ridge. Local news outlets picked up the story, and by Monday morning, it had gone viral online. A video titled, "The Forgotten Sniper's Final Shot." A 30-year record falls in silence was uploaded to YouTube, racking up millions of views within hours. The video opened with footage of Sam stepping out of his Chevy, his slow walk to lane 12, and the moment of his perfect shot, captured by a drone camera that happened to be filming the competition. It showed Clara's tearful reaction, the recruits' stunned faces, and the general's salute, all set to a stirring orchestral score that swelled at just the right moments. But the heart of the video was a voiceover, narrated by Clara herself, her voice raw with emotion. "My grandfather never wanted fame," she said, as the camera zoomed in on the hawk carving on Sam's rifle. "He fought in Vietnam, saved lives, and trained a generation of snipers. But he walked away from it all because the weight of those he couldn't save was too heavy." On August 15th, 2025, he reminded us that true heroes don't need to shout, they just need to show up. If you know a veteran whose story deserves to be heard, share this with them. Back at Camp Willow Ridge, a new frame was hung in the training hall, right beside the 1995 plaque. It held the target from Sam's shot, split clean through the center, with a small inscription. "Samuel Harper, Camp Pendleton, 1995. Returned 2025. Precision eternal." Below the frame, a small crowd gathered, recruits, instructors, and even a few veterans who'd driven in from neighboring towns to see the legend for themselves. They didn't come for autographs or selfies. They came to pay their respects, leaving small tokens at the base of the wall. A folded American flag, a single bullet casing, a handwritten note that read, "Thank you, Hawk." Sam didn't stay for the fanfare. He left that afternoon, his Chevy kicking up dust as it rolled out of the base. But before he went, he handed Clara the M24, its weight heavy with history. "Keep it safe," he said, his voice soft but firm. "And keep shooting straight." Clara nodded, clutching the rifle like a piece of her grandfather's soul. As Sam drove away, a group of recruits lined up at the range entrance, saluting as he passed. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Ethan was among them, his salute the steadiest of all. The following week, Clara returned to Camp Willow Ridge for another training session. She stood at lane 12, holding her grandfather's rifle, the hawk carving glinting in the morning light. The same recruits who'd laughed at Sam now watched her with respect, some even asking for tips. She raised the M24, her hand steady, and fired. The shot wasn't perfect, but it hit the target, a small victory that felt like a promise kept. She glanced back at the bleachers, half expecting to see Sam watching. He wasn't there, but she knew he'd seen enough. Sam, meanwhile, was back at his small farmhouse in rural Virginia, sitting on the porch with a cup of black coffee. The morning was quiet, the only sound the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind. He'd seen the YouTube video. Clara had insisted on showing him, and he'd nodded quietly, a faint smile on his lips. "Guess the story's out now," he'd said, his tone more amused than proud. But what meant more to him was the letter Clara had received from a Vietnam veteran in Texas, a man who'd served in the same unit as Sam. The letter read, "I knew Hawk in '72. He saved my life that night in the Delta. Tell him, I never forgot." On the last day of August, Clara visited her grandfather, bringing with her a small wooden box. Inside was a medal, a bronze star, awarded to Sam in 1973 but never claimed. She'd tracked it down through military archives, a months-long effort she'd kept secret. "You deserve this," she said, placing the box in his hands. Sam opened it slowly, his fingers trembling for the first time that summer. He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes said everything. He pinned the medal to his denim jacket, right over his heart, and pulled Clara into a hug. "You're my medal, kid," he whispered. Months later, Camp Willow Ridge held its annual Veterans Day ceremony, and for the first time, Sam Harper attended, not as a spectator, but as an honored guest. He stood at the podium, the M24 resting on a table beside him, and spoke for the first time about that night in 1972. His voice was steady, his words simple. "I didn't fight for medals or records," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "I fought for the men beside me, and I came here for my granddaughter. That's what matters, who you show up for." The crowd erupted in applause, but Sam didn't linger. He stepped down, took Clara's hand, and walked back to his Chevy, leaving the spotlight behind. The YouTube video continued to spread, translated into multiple languages, and shared across military communities in the US and Europe. It inspired countless veterans to share their own stories, sparking a movement to honor those who served quietly. And at Camp Willow Ridge, a new tradition was born. Every August 15th, the recruits would gather at Lane 12, where a small plaque now stood. It read, "In honor of Samuel Hawk Harper, for showing us what precision and humility look like." Beneath the plaque, a single hawk feather was carved into the wood, a quiet tribute to a man who'd never sought to be remembered, but whose legacy would never be forgotten.